All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. I want to thank each of you for watching. This is our inaugural book club discussion in honor of Women's History Month. I know there are several rattlers who are watching, so thank you also, and some of our supporters and young professionals and board members. Today's discussion will be about a very important topic that addresses the security of women in nation states and its relevance as far as its security in of countries. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with Dr. Claudia Donoso and Peggy Pace, our chair of the Board of Trustees. But now I want to turn it over to introduce my colleague, Samantha Scory, who inspired the World Affairs Council to start the book club. And Samantha, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, all. Welcome to our first ever World Affairs Council of San Antonio Book Club. We are super excited to have you here today. Little background on World Affairs Council. We work really hard to promote public understanding of foreign policy and international topics, which is why it is so important and so exciting to see you all here today, or I guess virtually see you guys here today. You know, we set out with the intention of starting a book club that works with everyone's busy schedules while also engaging discussions on these important global topics. We're thankful to have your support and participation today. This month's book choice was Sex and World Peace, which, as you all know, or hopefully should know, highlights the importance of women's security and the impact it has on the world. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this month's book club and chair of the board, Peggy Pace. We're so grateful to have someone so accomplished, impressive, and congenial as our moderator for this program. Thank you for all that you do. And I am so excited for you all to hear from one of my all-time favorite professors, Dr. Claudia Donoso. Thank you for being our guinea pig on this project and for donating your time. We're so happy to work with you on such a fun program. And now, welcome to Book Club. Take it away, Peggy.
Thank you, Samantha. And as Armin said, this is Samantha's brainchild, and it's very exciting to be part of this. I'm very honored to introduce, and we're very lucky to have Dr. Claudia Donoso with us today to help unpack the incredible amount of information contained in the book. Dr. Denoso received her PhD in interdisciplinary studies from the University of British Columbia in Canada. She's assistant professor of graduate international relations at St. Mary's University here in San Antonio. Her research interests involve critical security studies, intersectional feminism, border studies, human security and communities in the global South, and Latin American politics. Dr. Denoso, I'm going to turn it over to you to help us better understand sex and world peace.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start this conversation by thanking the team of the World Affairs Council for organizing this event and for inviting me to participate in this book discussion about sex and world peace. When the authors published the book, they incorporate different disciplines in this study. Basically, the book was written by two political scientists who specialize in international relations, Valerie Hudson, Mary Caprioli, one geographer who specializes in the study of Islamic societies, Shad Emmett, and one psychologist who specializes in the relationship between socialization, gender, and peace, Bonnie Valif Spanfield. In an interview, one of the authors, Valerie Hudson, mentioned that when they were thinking about a title for the book, they found out that there were several male scholars that have already vastly written about sex and war. Therefore, it was important for them to start changing that conversation and write about sex and world peace. So in this book, the authors go beyond the traditional understanding of security in global affairs, which is generally associated with the national security of the state. And they invite us to rethink security by briefly including the notion of human security, especially women's security. So this book teaches us why we need to care about gender equality at all. And the main claim or argument of the authors is that no liberal democracies or the level of wealth of powerful states, but women's well-being in society is actually the best predictor of state stability and security. They believe that there is a link between what is happening with women in a country and what kind of state behavior you see at the world stage, demonstrating, therefore, that security of women is a vital factor in the security of the state and its incidence in conflict and war. But the authors support this statement with evidence. This argument claim is not merely ideological. They refer to evolutionary theory, explaining how processes of socialization impact the way that we interact with each other based on our sex, our biological sex. And they claim that male-bounded groups are the heart of a society as an evolutionary legacy. Therefore, violence towards groups, outgroups, outside the male group serves as a male bonding mechanism, all this violence, in order to reduce within group tensions between males. But the authors give us some hope, and they argue that mitigation of male dominance hierarchies as the primary form of social organization is possible, and it does diminish state instability and conflict. Specifically on page 78 of the book, the authors refer to the work of experts who have studied the concept of patriarchy, such as Peterson and Graham, and they know that patriarchy is not inevitable, and that patriarchy emerged not as a direct mapping of genes onto behavior, but out of the particular strategies that men and some women invent for achieving their emotional goals. And here I want to take a second to explain and discuss the word invent. So what is an invention in the first place? Maybe it is a creation, it is a construction of something new. Therefore, patriarchy should be understood as a social construction based on shared understanding of gender relations or sex roles. And we learn what is a feminine, what is a masculine behavior in several social institutions. In the family, we learn how little girls have to behave. In the school, in the church, even in the workplace, we are taught how we should behave. And something that we have to consider that since gender roles or sex roles are a social construction, they can also be deconstructed. What do I mean with deconstruction? Destroy this construction, this understanding, and create a new understanding of gender relations. So in order to support this idea that is the base of their main argument that women's well-being in society is the best predictor of state stability and security, the four authors also use both quantitative and qualitative methods of analysis. And quantitative methods are basically surveys and statistics that they present to show us the link between violence against women and state aggressiveness in global politics. In this vein, therefore, the authors are very proud that they actually developed the Women Stats database, which is the largest compilation of the status of women. It actually includes 325 variables for 175 countries. With this database, the authors were able to look at various aspects of women's everyday life, such as physical security, trafficking of women, sex ratio and some preference, inequality in family law, the practice of polygamy, the female genital cutting, age of marriage. And they began to compare states regarding their practices in these specific areas. And this database has become so useful for many international organizations. Even the United Nations have used this database to create a background brief policy papers to explain the situation of the status of women in several countries. And regarding the security from this database, measures the security of women. So rather than measuring military spending that feature in other security and peace indices, they focus on information that are actually relevant to women. That is the household, in terms of intimate partner violence, in the community where women feel safe walking in their community at night, at the country level through battle deaths in organized crime. So therefore, they are measuring many aspects of women's security. And with this, they are telling us that security is way more than national security. And security entails many dimensions: food security, women in economics, state conflict and women. And particularly regarding the state conflict in women, they explain that the higher the level of violence against women, the worse an state relations with its neighboring countries. They also mention that the larger the gender gap, the more likely to be involved in inter or intra-state conflict or to use violence in a conflict. And the higher the level of violence against women, the less peaceful the nation state will behave in the international system. Finally, they also explain that the higher the level of violence against women, the more likely a nation is to be non-compliant with international norms. And they highlight this point, and they say that states must think more about their obligations under CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly. And states that are party to the CEDAW must submit regular reports to the CEDAW committee, typically at 4 yearly intervals. And however, since states tend to send reports that show 100% achievement of gender equality, which is impossible even for the more progressive countries, the UN actually has a quite interesting strategy to get secondary reports from local groups that represent NGOs and civil society in order to increase the level of accountability and to validate the report that was sent by a government. So this database was launched in 2012, but actually opened the door for many other relevant initiatives. For instance, the Georgetown Institute of Women, Peace and Security, together with the International Peace Institute and the government of Norway, they co-hosted a discussion linking the Women, Peace and Security Index to its implementation. And this new database was launched in October 2017 at the United Nations, and basically recognize international data sources and ranks 153 countries on peace and security, issues of women's inclusion and justice in homes, communities, and societies. And actually, this index is the first one to be built on the principles of sustainable development goals. But something that I would like to highlight here is that since the Sustainable Development were born at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development at the Rio de Janeiro conference, after the publication of this book, that's why the Women Stat didn't include these goals, but they did include the Millennium Goals. So this new index encouraged an holistic approach to human rights, to development, to security, and within the index, 3 dimensions of inclusion, justice, and security. These dimensions are measured by the achievements of women in education, employment, parliamentary representation, as well as the access to cell phones and financial services. So justice is captured in both at the formal and informal aspects through several indicators that measure the extent of discrimination in the legal system, alongside any bias in favor of sons and exposure to discriminatory norms. So let's go back to the book itself. As I mentioned before, the authors also use qualitative methods such as interviews, stories of women who have been impacted by gender-based discrimination. In chapter 2, the authors actually spend the entire chapter discussing several experiences of women, and they discuss what role the concepts of shame and honor and the devaluation of women labor played out in the lives of real women and girls. They show several forms of gendered microaggression, such as daily acts of harm, subordinate and disrespect of women. And they highlight that these kind of everyday life microaggressions have become part of everyday life and therefore invisible, even natural. So many men and even women, they have accepted this kind of microaggression. So in this chapter also the authors show us several stories of rape as a tool of war. For instance, they include the story of a Muslim woman who was raped by Serb soldiers in the Balkan War in the 90s. And they highlight that rape has been used as a tool of war for centuries. However, rape in war has been considered a war crime only since 1996. And they ask a question, is such brutality against women perpetrated only by strangers in war? And the answer is no. The war zone of women extends in their everyday peacetime lives. Domestic violence is a global problem, not only for Muslim women in countries such as Afghanistan, where domestic violence reaches close to 80%, but even in more progressive Nordic states such as Sweden, where domestic violence reaches 25%. And by telling us several stories, they demonstrate how certain women themselves support patriarchy as a system of male dominance. For example, in India, women, no men, are the perpetrators of female infanticide. Or in Egypt, women perform genital cutting to other women and little girls as a custom to extinguish female sexual desire in honor shame cultures. But this practice is not only physical, difficult, creating terrible harm, but also psychological damage. But let's concentrate only on the physical ones. You know, this kind of genital cutting can create chronic infection, infertility, and painful intercourse. But given the burden of protecting a girl's virginity in these honor shame societies, girls are even married off at the onset of their puberty. And in the best cases, grooms are at least a decade older, if not even older. And in this context, the authors point out that security scholars are overlooking the situation of women in the study of security. And mainly because violence has been narrowly defined and has been traditionally related to great military conflicts, males fighting, soldiers fighting, protecting the state, protecting the women. But the researchers of this book explain that the death toll among Indian women as a result of female infanticide and sex-selective abortion from the 80s to the present is almost 40 times the death toll from all India's wars. Therefore, rethinking security entails to understand that the promotion of development, health, education, and the empowerment of women and girls is key to their human security. The last chapters of the book point out to top-down and bottom-up initiatives to address women's insecurity. Some top-down strategies entail the inclusions of women in government positions through a quota system. And some Nordic countries have been so successful with this kind of system that they have to ensure to have no less than 40% of male participation in government positions. In contrast, at the time the authors wrote this book, other countries like the United States had one of the lowest levels of female representation in the national legislature. Ironically, the US has ensured that all the countries that it has invaded, like Iraq and Afghanistan, increase the quota for women, but they don't do it at home. As 2020, women are 51% of the population in the US, but make up only of 24% of the US Senate, 27% of the US House of Representatives, 30% of statewide elected executives, 31% of state legislative seats, 23% of mayors in cities with populations over 30,000, and of course, 0% of presidents of the United States. And for certain demographics, the numbers are even worse. Women of color, Republican women have a lower representation than Democrat women. Young women and low-income women are especially underrepresented. But quotas matter. Including women in decision-making not only changes attitudes about women and their capabilities, it also changes attitudes about what issues policymakers should address. Issues of international cooperation instead of international conflict. How are we going to address conflict resolution by increasing the participation of women? Healthcare for all as a human right, treatment of migrants, or subsidized childcare for working mothers. Canada is one of the countries that provide that service. Pay maternity leave and parent leave and father leave, for more than 3 months, at least a year, pay for that. So they will consider those topics to improve women's security and women's lives. The European Union has been quite proactive in tackling issues of domestic violence. Actually, the European Union has ensured that laws among all members are harmonious. Another top-down initiative that is presented by the authors is the importance to implement a state responsibility to protect women. And they mentioned that even UN Security Council members, such as the United States, have not implemented the UN Security Council 1325 resolution in conflicts that they are involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. So what is this resolution 1325 then? Well, it is an important resolution because it actually affirms the relevance of the participation of women and the inclusion of the gender perspective in peace negotiations, humanitarian planning, peacekeeping operations, and post-conflict peace building and governance. Resolution 1820 recognizes sexual violence as a tactic of war and a matter of international peace and security that necessitates security response of the states. Resolution 1880 strengthens the efforts to end sexual violence in conflict by appointing a special representative of the Secretary General and teams of experts on rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. And finally, the Resolution 1889 establishes indicators for the monitoring of the Resolution 1325 to make sure that they are implementing the resolution, and request the Secretary General to submit a report on women's participation and inclusion in peace building. So something that is important to acknowledge is that these top-down initiatives at the United Nations levels, at the government level, are important. If properly implemented, are great, but not enough. And for this reason, the authors also discuss bottom-up initiatives where women themselves are implementing change. And this is I think that the nicest part, empowering women to transform their lives. And for example, in Saudi Arabia, the authors show an example that a group of women came up with an idea to create a women's only hotel, giving employment to women with all kinds of skills. And this is a positive story about the Lutan Hotel and Spa, which is owned by 20 Saudi princesses and business women. A sad story that ended up in something positive is one of a Yemeni girl that was married at the age of 9, without her consent, obviously, to a man in his 30s, who took her out of school, beat her, and forced himself upon her. And she had the courage to escape and to hail a taxi for the first time, and went to a court to see a male judge who was willing to hear her story. And she was able to find a female lawyer who helped her with her divorce. And since then, this little woman that now is a young woman has raised funds to fight child marriage in Yemen. Now I also want to share a little bit of my experience as a researcher in this kind of field. In 2013, I began the fieldwork for my dissertation about feminist critical human security in border zones in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. I conducted several interviews with governmental authorities that were in charge of security, gender planning, development planning, also with academics, and of course, with the leaders of several women's organizations. And I conducted 2 workshops with local women in 2 border towns. One of them was in a rural town close to the border with Colombia. And I conducted this workshop with Black women in this rural town called La Concepcion. And I was delighted to find their level of empowerment, because sometimes we have this stereotype of powerless, poor, Black, rural women who need the help of us, women who are educated, who has better understanding of gender equality, you name it. But I think that it's important to remove that moral authority when we approach local women, because they know what is better for them. They know what it is better for their human security. And one woman even told me, thank you for coming all the way from Canada, but we want you to teach us how to design public policy, because we have several projects that we want to carry out and we want to present that to the local authorities. I say, great, I can do that, thank you. Another woman highlighted, okay, well, we're going to discuss about gender equality, but it is important to include men in this conversation, so men understand that feminists are not a bunch of crazy women that are jumping on the streets protesting without any purpose, but include them in order to change gender relations. And they were amazing, very creative. And they said, what men like? Well, they like sports, they like beer. Well, let's organize a volleyball tournament. And they did that. And during the volleyball tournament, they were showing messages: do not hit me, love me, I am your companion. And this is amazing, how you can learn from the other. So this kind of initiatives, teaching gender equality in the household, at schools, researching more about women's security, understanding that gender might not be the only source of their discrimination, but maybe race, religion, class, ethnicity, nationality, and even organizing these kind of discussions like this one are excellent steps to create positive change. So here I would like to conclude my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions. That was really wonderful, and I think helped all of us understand a little bit more about the book and some of the concepts there. The first question that we have is, what are some commonalities that countries or cultures share when valuing or devaluing women?
Well, basically, it is there. They share the fact that they are patriarchal and repressive cultures. But please do not blame only or stereotype only Muslim societies, because this happened everywhere at different levels. The famous Latin American machismo, male dominance in Africa, sexualization of women's bodies through sex work in the sex tourist industry in Russia, Asia, Israel. And domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of race, regardless of class, regardless of sexual orientation, religion, or gender.
Let me follow up with that one. How is the United States doing with sexual violence compared to against women compared to other countries in the world?
Well, the US is doing better than many Latin American countries, African countries, and other developing countries. But unfortunately, the US is a developed country. And, you might think that, they have achieved certain level of human rights and democracy at home. So there is still a lot of work to do about that.
What benefits have we seen for women having more equal positions, and where have we seen this predominantly?
Well, gender diversity in the workplace, for instance, contributes to a wider talent pool. Companies that don't discourage women to join them are doing way better because they are including half of the population, and they are including different perspectives. Women like to enhance collaboration, solidarity, and all these women are quite loyal. So that contributes to staff retention. And they reflect the needs of customers. They really care about the customers. And all this creates great profits, in the long term. Another field will be, gender diversity in the parliament. So, and gender equality in politics is not only how many congresswomen we have, because if these women are not responding to women's needs, what are they for? But if they are actually promoting laws and policies that create a framework to promote gender equality, to prevent domestic violence, so this is a positive change. And these laws began to change some understanding, some attitudes towards women's capacities and responsibilities.
Let's see. What foreign policy changes are needed to make violence against women less common, and what is currently being done to counter injustices worldwide?
So, well, I think that it's important that states respect actually their international commitments, such as the CEDA, the Resolution 1325, that any development initiative abroad through USA should incorporate a clear statement that aims to empower women in developing countries, but not through a top-down approach where the expert comes and tell the woman what they need to do because they have to fulfill a specific mandate. They have to include the local voices of women.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the book it talked about the resolution that the United States had, I think, adopted but not ratified. And I don't have the number right in front of me. Was it the 1325 resolution that the United States was one of the countries, one of the few developed countries that had not ratified that? Has that changed in the years since the book?
No, actually, the problem with the US is that it's a country that does not like to ratify international commitments. And basically because they believe that that will be a loss of sovereignty. So they don't want to give away that. They don't want to give authority to a supreme international court or to a supreme international institution such as the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights or the United Nations. So they want to have control over that, and that's why they haven't ratified many international commitments.
So that's not necessarily Republican/Democrat issue, because that the Obama administration didn't have particular fervor to adopt that. Neither did the Trump. Have you heard anything about the Biden administration taking up some of these resolutions and pushing for ratification for the safety of women?
Well, I haven't heard anything yet, but I think that, it's not going to be too easy for the Biden administration to push that forward without a strong opposition.
Mhm.
They have to be quite talented. They have to create workshops, interinstitutional workshops at the government, at the federal level, in order to make the public servants, the senators, the Congress people, to understand the link between gender equality and security. Because the problem is that many people at the highest political level, they are not aware of all this. They just don't know. So you have to educate the policy makers first in order to promote these ratifications and changes in other fields.
So is this an opportunity for a bottom-up approach to organize a group of men and women to put it as a priority of the administration or of the Congress? Is there any sort of fervor to do that at this point?
I think that is an important initiative, an initiative that emerged from the civil society that say, okay, this is our input. We are going to create awareness. Change only happens when we create awareness. And when we create partnerships, we are not creating competition of visions, of ideologies, or saying, well, I'm Republican, Democrat. We are creating partnerships to improve certain topics at the federal level. In this case, gender equality through the ratification of international binding instruments, but also at the domestic level. How are we going to improve the security of American women?
Right. Well, that's a good question. Let's see, I'll go back to this. The book came out in 2012. What has changed in the world, and are these points still salient?
Well, I would say that yes, they are still relevant. And we have to understand that transformation of a culture of violence against women does not happen overnight. It is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take several years, decades, even of constant effort to start changing through awareness programs, mass media campaigns, films, to start the conversation and include men not as the enemy, but also as the victims of patriarchy, because they were told that a man has to behave in certain way. They have to be competitive. They have to be violent. They have to, maybe be unfaithful. They don't need to do anything in the household. You name it. So it's something that we need to understand that patriarchy also puts a lot of pressure on men because men have to show their masculinity all the time. And when they fail to do so, they are excluded from the pack. And they are, oh, you are not a real man, whatever, especially in many Latin American countries, when you see a man cooking or helping cleaning, what are you doing? This is a woman's work. That kind of mentality has to change because we are both members of the household.
What has global phenomena such as COVID done to help or hurt the security of women, such as an increase of domestic violence or economic disparity?
Well, the question basically answers all the impact of the pandemic. Many women were laid off, and those who weren't laid off were forced to work from home. Sometimes women have to work in the same household with their male partners, and confinement creates anxiety, depression, and that can create situations where women's personal security can be vulnerable, and they can be exposed to domestic violence. Here in San Antonio, there are several news that have reported increase of domestic violence due to the pandemic.
Yeah. What countries now are doing the best globally as far as security for women, and what can we learn from those countries?
Well, I would use the example of Norway and Sweden. Iceland, Iceland is so way advanced in the case of gender equality. But even, our neighbor Canada, you might think, that they are doing better than the US. Yeah, yes, they are. But, there is a lot of murder of indigenous women. So indigenous women are killed. They are dropped in rivers based on their gender and their race. And the government is not doing too much about it. So all that kind of violence and structural violence, discrimination against little girls, giving more opportunities to boys to go to school in other developing countries and exclude women for that benefit is something that should change.
How is Iceland or the Scandinavian countries, how have they addressed the issue and come out with such good scores as far as women equality and women's security?
Well, actually, it's not enough to have laws if you are not going to enforce them. So they actually enforce their laws. They increase female participation in public service, and you can see the benefits, a different perspective, a different understanding. Iceland doesn't get involved in politics, international conflicts, nothing. They want to serve their community. They want to guarantee the well-being of their citizens equally.
Well, and that circles back to one of the premises of the book, and that is the greater the women's equality, the greater the security and the peacefulness of the nation. So it's sort of a perfect example. Is it time, Samantha?
It's time.
That may be a good place to stop. Thank you so much. This has been very interesting, and I just so much appreciate your participation and your help in us unpacking this book.
Thank you, Peggy, for the invitation and for moderating the discussion.
I enjoyed it.
I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Denoso from St. Mary's University and Peggy Pace for your time and participation. Thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions, support. We're looking forward to our next book club, the end of the month, next month, where we'll be discussing the Arab American experience with the book Conditional Citizens. So look out for that information. We also have an event coming up on April 20th about US-Mexico relations. So feel free to tune in. And if you want to continue supporting the World Affairs Council of San Antonio, please consider a membership, which we'll be dropping links in the chat right now, or consider donating. We really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.